fighter, avenger, vigilante, hero. Batman is as complex as he is contradictory.
Bruce.
Rachel's told me everything about you.
I certainly hope not.
Exploring his character can be a revealing test for the viewer. Because in Batman, we can find the heroism, the fear, and the darkness inside us all. The brainchild of creator Bob Kane, Batman debuted in the pages of Detective Comics in 1939. It was the decade of the Great Depression, urban expansion, and violent crime. Since then, billionaire Bruce Wayne and his masked alter ego have been shown as everything from a mob-crushing crime fighter to adding layers of psychological motivation. In the 2005 motion picture Batman Begins, one of the keys to understanding Batman's psychology lies in a universal emotion. In the film, young Bruce Wayne develops a paralyzing fear of bats.
Took quite a fall, didn't we, Master Bruce?
And why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up.
Fear is one of the fundamental psychologies of childhood, and learning how to deal with the fact that we will be afraid, but we will go on to do things despite our fears.
You know what?
One of the interesting things about Batman Begins is it gave us a little more glimpse into the young Bruce Wayne.
Central to the Batman mythology is the notion of choice. That's very, very central to everything. The Batman stories portray the alternatives of good and evil, life or death. In Bruce Wayne's case, he was confronted with the most horrible tragedy one could imagine.
Wallace, Joey, come on, fast.
That's fine. Here you go.
Bruce Wayne is a very plausible character psychologically. Kids generally, even if they're not directly responsible for some terrible event, generally personalize the event and take responsibility for it.
Don't be afraid.
He feels guilty because his fear caused them to go into this dark alley, and they died as a result of it.
The death of Bruce Wayne's parents is an integral part of the Batman mythology and was first depicted in the November 1939 issue of Detective Comics. It has continued to be incorporated into almost every telling and retelling of his early history.
Here's a kid who, at a very early age, learned that security is temporary, is fragile.
It was my fault, Alfred. I made them leave the theater. If I hadn't gotten scared.
It was nothing that you did. It was him.
It raises a question, which is, am I ever going to be secure? Can I ever trust anybody who won't also be taken away?
I miss him, Alfred.
And Bruce Wayne is a person who essentially has answered that question, I'm never going to be safe, so I better take matters into my own hands.
Rachel, this man killed my parents. I cannot let that pass.
You have the ultimate psychological moment of Batman. They're in the courtroom where his parents' murderer is on trial, and he has a gun in his pocket, and he has to decide whether or not to use it.
There is a member of the Wayne family here today. Has he got anything to say?
That's the character's moment of growth and judgment.
When people experience a traumatic event, it often calls into question fundamental beliefs they have. And this is the way that trauma can be a very powerful, positive force in inducing growth. With Bruce Wayne, he became dedicated to avenging, not revenging, but avenging his parents' death and protecting innocent people from criminal acts.
Motivation he has through the tragedy of his parents' death and his attitude to it.
When bringing the character of Bruce Wayne to the screen in Batman Begins, director Christopher Nolan found an unusual psychological parallel in a real-life historical figure, the 26th President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt.
Chris said, to me, the key to understanding the character is that Bruce Wayne is Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt's father was New York City's great patrician benefactor. He started the Museum of Natural History. He was one of the founders of the Children's Aid Society. And there's a similarity to Thomas Wayne, who was the great philanthropist of Gotham City.
People less fortunate than us have been enduring very hard times. So we built a new, cheap public transportation system to unite the city.
Like Bruce Wayne, Teddy goes through deep family tragedy. His mother and wife die on the same day. He goes off to the Dakota Badlands, probably to kill himself. Reforges himself in that situation and comes back and becomes this insane police commissioner bicycling through the city in the middle of the night. He's the Rough Rider, what we know as the iconography of Teddy Roosevelt. That's really the psychology that plays out in Bruce Wayne.
Your anger gives you great power, but if you let it will destroy you.
In the comic book histories, the timely appearance of a bat in Bruce's study gave him the idea for a crime-fighting alter ego that could avenge his parents' death. Originally called the Batman by creator Bob Kane, this second identity was inspired by popular characters like Zorro and the Shadow, wealthy crusaders who cloak their crime fighting behind a secret other self. In Batman Begins, the motives for Bruce's transformation are more psychologically based.
People need dramatic examples to shake them out of apathy, and I can't do that as Bruce Wayne. But as a symbol.
What symbol?
Something elemental, something terrifying.
In the film, Bruce chooses to adopt the appearance of a bat because it's a creature that embodies one of his greatest fears.
The symbolism of using the bat is he's conquered those fears. And there's a technique that mental health clinicians use for people who have fears. It's called exposure. It's just a wonderful example of how people become afraid of things and they can become unafraid of them.
The murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne instilled a sense of purpose in the life of their orphaned son. But as Batman, that life is far from easy. And each day, Bruce Wayne's psyche is divided between his normal self and his secret identity, which raises a fascinating question. Who is the real person? Bruce Wayne or Batman?
He is a perfect union of the two sides of all of us, the good and the evil that coexist in human life.
In the film Batman Begins, Bruce's choice to take on the identity of a bat not only taps into his own childhood fears, but into the fear most people have about the flying creatures.
In popular culture, a bat is a threat. It comes out at night. It's something you can't really see, but it can bite you, can suck your blood.
So what Batman does is take the iconography of evil. Look at medieval paintings of devils, demons. They have often horns and bat wings. Bats in every culture except the Chinese that I know about are symbols of evil, of the dark side, of death, of Satan. And that fascinates us. People are always fascinated by evil. Partially, I think, because it's an unacknowledged part of every one of us.
He's created this symbol, and that symbol can't have limits. He can't show weakness ever. And so you have the fight between what is good for Bruce Wayne and what is the right thing to do for Batman. And the two of them are not always compatible.
Of course, there are other ways of channeling anger and loss, like psychotherapy.
Well, why doesn't Batman just go into therapy? Why does Bruce Wayne just go into therapy and then be cured of Batman? The reality is that the Batman persona is the true persona, in our opinion, the way we handle the stories, and that Bruce Wayne is the mask.
If Batman's true personality remains a subject of debate, so do his motives for fighting crime. History and fiction are filled with figures who remind us that one person's hero is another person's vigilante.
In the letter of the law, Batman is a vigilante. He has identified the white and the black the right and the wrong, and lives by that code much more strictly than anybody else does. Laws are open to interpretation. Batman's law is not.
Where were the other drugs going?
I don't know. I swear to God.
Swear to me!
We have always glorified various vigilantes, whether we're talking about Robin Hood, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. There is this persona that makes us feel good. The problem is that when we start engaging those behaviors in an organized society, in a way that allows the citizenry to make a determination about who should be punished and how and when, we run the risk that their idea might not match up with the idea of the masses.
What he's doing is really outside the law. But as a citizen of Gotham, he really didn't have any choice because the law was so corrupt, he couldn't work within the law. But on the other hand, Batman has one rule. He will not take a life.
I will not become an executioner. He's got systems that he orders his behavior by to try and restrain his natural instinct for violence or for revenge or whatever dark impulses that drive him.
A lot of what makes him Batman is the ability to control himself, to be able to be disciplined. In many situations in life, success requires that we regulate our impulses. Somebody drives into a parking space ahead of us, and instead of ramming into him, which I'd love to do, I suppress that. I exert self-control. Self-regulation is like a muscle. We have, all of us, a muscular ability to regulate our impulses. Bruce Wayne is a man who's developed that. No one else. That's almost his superpower. The power of self-control.
If you finally learn to do what is necessary, I won't kill you.
Occasionally, Batman's critics have accused him of suffering from a hero complex, an obsessive compulsion to help others and right wrongs, as defined by psychologist Carl Jung.
Batman has this obsession with keeping things under control and making sure that the law is obeyed and that the innocent are not hurt. But his obsession leads him to pretty much cut out from his life anything that doesn't add to his mission as Batman.
He's obsessive-compulsive about that. I brought a story once where he's in the middle of an important business meeting, and it's late in the afternoon. He's discussing million-dollar business, and he stops paying attention, and he's simply watching the sun go down. And the second the sun vanishes behind the horizon, he goes, "Meeting's over, I've got to go."
He cannot stop being Batman. It's much easier to stop being Bruce Wayne. So once you understand that, then you can understand why he is motivated and why he continues to behave in the way he does.
Batman's behavior includes his choice to deny himself a lasting romantic relationship. Though Batman recognizes the line dividing justice and injustice, other Gotham creatures of the night see no such distinction.
There's nothing to fear.
And these denizens of darkness relish the chance to perform acts of unspeakable evil.
And here we go.
It's okay.
In the annals of superhero history, Batman's enemies are the most psychologically scarred, walking definitions of dysfunction, whose vicious deeds often evoke the violent and perverse acts of real-life criminals.
One of the most enduring things about Batman is his rogues gallery, the villains. Because, as I like to say, the rogues define the hero. The greater the threat, the greater the hero.
Demonstrating everything from psychopathology to narcissism, Batman's arch-enemies also offer twisted mirror images of Batman himself.
His villains, like Batman, experienced a tragedy. But he responded by saying, "I'm going to spend my life restoring justice to the world." His villains didn't make that choice.
There are plenty of villains that are just as obsessed, but they feel that anything bad that happened to them is something that they need to get payback from the world from, you know. Whereas Batman had the exact opposite point of view. Something bad happened to me, I'm gonna make sure it never happens to anybody else.
Other psychological ailments are clearly expressed by many of Batman's villains. The Riddler can't commit a crime without leaving behind a self-incriminating clue, the classic calling card of a narcissist.
Individuals who are narcissistic, they engage in the behaviors because they want to be noticed. You can look at someone like Ted Bundy, who committed a series of homicides, and yet he loved that he could thumb his nose in the face of law enforcement, giving them clues of where bodies were left, pointing in many respects to himself and defying them to catch him. That type of attention-seeking behavior is narcissism.
We meet the Scarecrow as a doctor at Arkham Asylum. He's used that entrusted place to experiment with chemicals and drugs. He enjoys watching people's minds completely snap as a result of the use of it.
There's nothing to fear but fear itself.
Scarecrow uses fear as a tool to ultimately get what he wants, independent of what it might cost others. This is an individual generally not psychotic, but very intense in their need to self-aggrandize.
A individual like the Unabomber, Theodore Kaczynski, part of his delusions is that mechanization and modernization is ruining the world, and takes it upon himself to send bombs to computer scientists, professors. He became vengeful. I'm going to take it out on society, and thus becomes this murderous, crazy person.
Eventually, each Batman villain ends up, however briefly, in Arkham Asylum, Gotham's institute for the criminally insane. But do villains like Scarecrow and Two-Face truly meet the legal definition of insanity?
In every psychiatric text that's published, you will find nowhere on any of its pages the word insane. Because insane is illegal, not a clinical term. And here's the best example of why the public can be so confused. Jeffrey Dahmer. How can a person who kills his victims, cuts them up, has their heads in the freezer, not be crazy? And yet, he did not meet the test of insanity in Wisconsin. The test for insanity is knowing that the act was wrong and not having the ability to conform behavior. He doesn't meet that test. He did it because he wanted to.
While most Batman villains operate under the influence of some form of psychosis, one rival is completely in control of her faculties. The whip-wielding jewel thief Selina Kyle, also known as Catwoman. Over the years, Batman and Catwoman have had a complicated on-again, off-again relationship. But Catwoman's villainous nature hasn't stopped Batman from pursuing her for reasons other than her crimes.
Catwoman is one of the few people in the world who wouldn't be in the kind of danger your average woman would be with Batman. She's as dangerous as he is. So he found someone who's kind of his equal.
Batman's well known to have had a dalliance, and more than a dalliance, with Catwoman. They have an affinity and a lot in common in terms of dressing up and jumping off rooftops. But ultimately, Catwoman, while not a terrible person, crosses a line that Bruce Wayne and Batman don't cross. Batman still operates within a moral code that's quite strict. So this is the challenge for Catwoman and Batman, as attractive as she is in all of her incarnations. He cannot accept her because even as lines between right and wrong are gray, he still sees those lines and he won't cross them.
Lust, greed, revenge, and a hunger for attention are all compulsions that can lead a human being into a life of crime. But the Dark Knight's deadliest enemy is perhaps the most difficult to fathom.
Armed robbery, double homicide. Got a taste for the theatrical like you.
And to unlock his secrets requires a journey into the ultimate heart of darkness.
A
year ago, these cops and lawyers wouldn't dare cross any of you. I mean, what happened?
So what are you proposing?
It's simple. Kill the Batman.
Of all the evildoers in Batman's universe, none is more explosive or unpredictable than the homicidal nemesis known simply as the Joker.
Come on, hit me!
He represents a kind of chaos, of meaninglessness, of randomness, the idea of the character of the Joker, just the luck of the cards.
Here's my card.
Introduced by DC Comics in 1940, the Joker initially had no backstory. Over the years, several versions of his history have been written, describing the character's maniacal metamorphosis. One involves a tragedy, in which the Joker fell into a vat of chemicals and became disfigured as a result. The accident not only changed his appearance, but also twisted his mind.
You don't know what makes him tick. Maybe he won't kill you. Maybe he'll hand you a $1,000 bill. He'll probably kill you, but you can't be sure. So in that way, he's a perfect villain for Batman.
Most characters can justify the terrible things they do as, I'm doing this for my family, I'm doing this because the world hates me, I'm doing this because... pick an answer. The Joker does it because I'm as nutty as a squirrel, and I'm proud of that.
Some men aren't looking for anything logical. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with.
Evening, Commissioner.
Some men just want to watch the world burn.
There's a clear motivation which is understandable for what's prompting their behavior. In the case of somebody who's mentally ill, you can't necessarily predict what they're going to do because their motivations are not the normal ones.
For example, an individual such as John Hinckley, who believed, amidst his psychosis and narcissism, that if he were to assassinate the President of the United States, Jodie Foster would fall in love with him. You see quickly where the logic in that line of thought falls apart.
Why so serious?
And the Joker has an agenda of chaos. He's a unique villain in that he is not even necessarily after money or power or any of those traditional things. So that's really the hardest kind of evil to fight because you can't bargain with it.
Well, hello, beautiful.
In The Dark Knight, the battle between Batman and the Joker is taken to the ultimate level.
A little fighting here. I like that.
Then you're gonna love me.
I always felt, as Batman, that there was a great curiosity about this Joker because he hadn't come across anybody like him before. This is another character like himself who will not compromise whatsoever.
I think the Joker is the logical response to a character like Batman.
They are dark reflections of each other. They're both men who operate outside of normal social norms. They're both highly talented, highly gifted at what they do. That's a challenge. It's not just a physical challenge. It's a moral challenge. It's an intellectual challenge. And Batman can't let that go. Because the Joker isn't just threatening him physically. He's threatening the premise of Batman's existence. That's why it's such an epic discussion that they're having. And of course, it's played out physically, it's played out in fights and punches and gunshots. Ultimately, it's a philosophical conflict, and not one that's easily resolved.
The Joker wants to see that everybody has a price, that nobody is pure, and that even Batman can be bought or can be leveraged in such a way that he would compromise his principles.
Whatever the psychological cause of characters like the Joker, the villains of Batman have given us indelible images of the power of the human mind and its capacity for cruelty.
Everyone has the capacity to do evil, and everyone has the capacity to do good.
Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl talks about the last of the human freedoms. It's the attitude one is going to adopt towards life. That's the fundamental choice that we retain no matter what we are experiencing, no matter where we are. That notion of choice is fundamental to the Batman personality.
I've seen now what I have to become to stop men like him.
Batman represents the incredible power that one enjoys when one consistently chooses the same direction, makes the same choice and the right one, to champion good, to choose to affirm life.
Beyond the thrill of his adventures, Batman gives the world something greater. His internal struggles offer